Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Overcoming the Podcast. I am your host, Taylor, and I'm coming at you today with the spontaneous ADHD mini-series that I decided to do this summer. And I'm bringing on a guest. We are going to be talking about relationships in general and also the sensitivities and just kind of some of those triggers that come along with that. I have Meredith Carder, who is an ADHD coach. You may know her as Hummingbird ADHD and seen some things we've done together, but I really invited her on to have this deeper conversation because I think it's so important and applicable to trauma survivors and those who do have ADHD or just neurodivergence in general. It kind of is hard to deal with relationships sometimes. So we're just going to have an open, honest conversation, share some tips, that kind of thing. So to get us started, Meredith, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Meredith Carder. I'm an ADHD coach and a creator. I work with adults with ADHD primarily. I also really focus on entrepreneurship and things like that. As prior to my business as an ADHD coach, I was a serial entrepreneur. So I love working with neurodivergent people and really helping them understand their brain and what makes them tick.
Yeah. I am so glad that we have come together. And I love that you have the background also with like the entrepreneurial side of things, because been there, it can be really
Yeah.
hard. And I have found also that one of the hardest things about being an entrepreneur sometimes is not just the work, but all of the relationships that you manage as well. Right.
Yeah.
And not taking
Yeah.
things personally and
Mhm.
and that kind of thing. Because sometimes things don't mesh and that's okay. But I think that's a really cool thing that we can also talk about
Yeah,
today.
we definitely can talk about that.
Yeah. I'm excited for that. So when we were deciding on topics, we were like, what should we talk about? And landed on relationships and like relationship sensitive dysphoria, I believe is how you say it, correct? Um,
So I think you're referring to RSD, which is
Rejection.
rejection
Mhm.
sensitive dysphoria, which
Yes.
can be a big player in how we interact with our relationships. But
Mhm.
that term refers to an extreme sensitivity to real or perceived rejection.
Okay.
So it's not a relationship term, but it is a very important concept that
Awesome.
we need to understand as people with ADHD when we talk about some of the communication things that happen within relationships. And something important that we need to understand is something that a lot of us deal with.
Absolutely. Thank you for that correction. I say RSD and I'm like, wait, that didn't sound right. But
Yeah, no worries.
I'm excited. I'm excited to kind of chat about this. So when we were going through topics, what made you want to talk about this?
Yeah, so both of those things. RSD is something that shows up in our relationships. It shows up in how we interact at work, which again can be very relationship driven.
Mhm.
And it really just has a huge impact on ADHDers. And most of us have never heard the term
Mhm.
until we really like start diving in. And I find that that's a topic that when people hear that term for the first time and hear it described and hear some of the impacts, they're like, if I only had heard this earlier,
Yeah.
maybe a lot of things could be different. So I just think we need more education on RSD and specifically. And I also just think it's so important for people with ADHD to really understand how neurodivergence impacts relationships, because without that understanding, we can't access coping strategies. We can't learn to communicate our needs. And it's just really something that impacts us in our everyday life.
Absolutely. I can think of so many examples off the top of my head, like, because I'm late diagnosed ADHD and always thinking that, oh, it must be me, it must be me. And like you said, when we have that term come through, we get more awareness, we get more knowledge, like it
Mm-hmm.
helps take that pressure off of us, right?
Yeah.
So looking back, do you have like a story or something that stands out to you in managing your own relationships and being neurodivergent?
Yeah, I mean, I have so many stories. The hard part is picking which one to talk
So
about.
valid.
Yes, it is very hard. I mean, if you want to talk about the impact of RSD in relationships specifically,
Yeah.
a story that's popping into my brain, actually, it's funny because I can give you a story that happened to me last night. that is like
Perfect.
super relevant. So last night I went to a dinner with a bunch of girlfriends. These are people that I really love and admire. I enjoy their company so much. We had an absolutely fantastic time. It was so fun. This morning I woke up and the first thought that popped into my head was like, oh my goodness, I was being so annoying last night.
Oh, been there.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And do I really have any evidence to really, nobody said, Meredith, you're being annoying, or like,
Yeah.
stop talking so much. And there was no communication other than I felt the vibe. And
Mm.
I have felt the vibe or had things said to me so many times in the past that's almost like this reaction hits. And that's what's
Yeah.
really tough about RSD specifically is it's a feeling that hits you.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't have a name for that, if you don't know, like, okay, you can't step out of that and say, okay, look, like, what evidence do you really have?
Yeah.
And kind of bring yourself back, you just believe that whatever that thought is telling you is real.
Yeah.
So, I'm so thankful that I have that language now because I was able this morning to be like, okay, did anything really happen that led you to believe that? What's really going on right now? What is this feeling kind of like really hinting at? And I kind of landed on the fact that I'm like exhausted. I'm tired. I haven't been sleeping good.
Mm-hmm.
I do actually, I really value the opinions of the people I was hanging out with.
Yeah.
And I really enjoy them. So maybe that's just telling me that these are my people.
Yeah.
And that reaction is just one that comes up because I do care about them. I think sometimes that reaction can also be because they're not the right people.
Mm-hmm.
But being able to have language around that and recognize, okay, this is not real. This is RSD.
Yeah.
Like this thought isn't real.
Yeah.
So I think about that story in the context of so many other stories in
Yeah.
my past. And before I knew I was neurodivergent, before I knew all of these reactions and terms I was having, I would have had that thought potentially. And maybe I wouldn't really like reach out and hang out with them again for a while.
Mm.
Maybe I would just over time, if I felt that every time I hung out with these people,
Yeah.
maybe I would push them away. And
Yeah.
what's ironic is I've had friend groups. Like I had a really tight group during the pandemic. And I remember things like, I really care about you guys. Don't let me push you away. I remember saying that to them
Mm.
because it was such a pattern for me
Yeah.
because that feeling sucks. That
It
feeling
does.
is awful. And so over time, if we're not recognizing that, like what's happening and understanding our reactions, then we make choices that we don't even really like consciously want to make. Like we push people away that we
Yep.
care about, and it has that impact in terms of like not really being able to be close to people because we want to avoid that feeling. So
Yeah.
now that I can see that, I was able to like step out of it. It still sucks to feel that way, but
Mm.
I understand it better now.
Well, and I think that I love what you were talking about is like my thoughts are not real, right? It's like that it doesn't always accurately describe the situation. Something that's like the simplest phrase that helped me in my healing journey and dealing with neurodivergence is just that thoughts are not facts.
Mm-hmm.
They're just information. And a lot of times they're just kind of reflecting to you your subconscious beliefs about yourself. They're
Yeah.
reflecting to you maybe some of the processing that's happening, like, with us with ADHD, that some of our processing in our brain is different, right? So, like, maybe there's
Mm-hmm.
just like a challenge with how things are processed. So you're seeing it incorrectly, right? So it's like there
Mm-hmm.
can be so many other things. And a thought is literally, it can just be a fleeting thing.
Yeah.
Like how many times I don't know about you, but like I'll think of like all of these what if things all the time. And like sometimes I'll just randomly be thinking like, what if there's a hurricane in Costa Rica tomorrow? And like I have no
Mm-hmm.
ties to that, but that's where my brain
Yeah.
goes, right? Like they're just random little things. But I think what happens is a random thought like that, we can just be like, oh, no big deal. But
Mm-hmm.
then we get back to something that's really meaningful to us, like you were talking about, like you value these people's opinions, and then you start to pick that apart of, oh my gosh, if this is real, then what does this say about me? And if I think
Mm-hmm.
I'm too much, or like you said, in the pattern of the past, you've been too much. Like I relate to that. I feel like most neurodivergent, especially women, relate to that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Always been the too much or too loud or too
Yep.
goofy, or, and then add in maybe someone who struggles with interpreting social skills and all of those cues, right? So it can be hard, and socializing is hard. And I relate to you in that I have struggled with that in my life and friend groups, even if friend groups are really secure. I'm very
Mm-hmm.
grateful in the fact that like I have a solid group of humans now who know this about me. And if they
Mm-hmm.
notice something is off, they'll give me reassurance and be like, Taylor, everything's fine. Or if they
Yeah.
kind of pull back, or I'll be like, hey, I was given some language by my roommate actually, and we both have these like anxious, wondering thoughts. And sometimes when we want to like ask about it or get validation, or sometimes there is something wrong when we pick up on things, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the way that the language that we use is, hey, I have a story in my head that, is this
Mm-hmm.
accurate? Is this something we need to work through? Like what's going on, right? So for
Mm-hmm.
instance, I had a conversation with my roommate the other day and I'm like, hey, I have a story in my head that you're upset with me. Is this true? Right?
Mm-hmm.
And at first she was just kind of like, no, like I'm overwhelmed. I have things going on. I'm like, oh, okay. But then there was a little tiny something and I could tell. And then we were able to talk about it. And she's like, oh, but it's really small. And mostly what you're feeling is this overwhelm in my life. And I was like,
Mm-hmm.
okay. So we had an open, honest, vulnerable conversation about it instead of me just being like, I'm just going to avoid her because she's mad at me. Right.
Right.
Because that's what we think. And like this tiny, tiny thing was a little tiny thing that I did that I didn't realize I did. Right.
Mm-hmm.
But she had so much more going on. And I think also that's an important part is like sometimes the vibes are off, but it's
Yeah.
not our fault.
Right. 100%. And that's what it is it's like, I love using the word as story.
Mm-hmm.
Like our brains are so creative
Yeah.
and they will, and especially with ADHD. And I think that's why the stories can get really, really dramatic and
Yes.
really out of control.
Yes.
We have that propensity towards rumination with
Mhm.
ADHD. Like
Mhm.
everybody ruminates. That's a normal human experience.
Yep.
But our brains, we like the way you can describe it is that like for a normal person, when they're ruminating, if they start moving into like doing an action or working or whatever, that rumination like kind of dims down all the way almost to off.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas we're doing the thing, but we're still running that rumination in our brain.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why those feelings are so painful for us because it's
Yeah.
not unheard of. Like my best friend that was there that doesn't have ADHD could have that thought too. She
Yeah.
could be like, wow, I was being annoying, or that person like looked at me weird or whatever. They have those thoughts too. But there's so many things that differentiate just having that thought and being able to move on to from it than like an RSD reaction. Like an RSD
Yeah.
reaction, it is very similar. I'd be interesting to hear like the trauma point of view from it. It's almost like a trauma response at times because it can like you feel it in
Absolutely.
your body like it is and a lot of the reason we react to the point of it being more of like a dysphoria is because of all of the micro traumas we're experiencing throughout our life, like the
Yep.
person that told you talk too much, the person that like had like as a child we got all those messages, so
Mm-hmm.
then it all comes flooding back to us in that moment where we notice something,
Yeah.
so it is
Yeah.
quite extreme. And if we don't like you said, if we don't have that language like you said with your roommate to be like, here's the story, let's talk through it, then
Yeah.
it just keeps running in that rumination script and it just gets bigger
Yeah.
and more creative.
Yeah. And for those who haven't heard the term rumination before, I kind of break it down as like repeating illumination. That's kind of like you're
Mm-hmm.
getting that like illumination of your thoughts, right? It just seems like something is like just comes to light for you. But it comes to light for you repetitively, right? Like over and
Mm-hmm.
over and over again. And then you get so stuck on it that you really have a hard time moving forward. Like if you have something to do it's hard to distract
Mm-hmm.
yourself if you have work to do or whatever. Uh,
Yeah.
and I just thought of something that I'm going to go back to later with this. So apologize, ADHD. However, I do want to touch on what you were saying about how, yes, there is this component of it can be just the neurodivergence, but also what you were saying about how it could be with trauma is I think that really RSD is a symptom that
Mhm.
people who have experienced these different things like ADHD, that's definitely a symptom, but that is like RSD isn't ADHD. You know what I mean?
Right,
So
right.
like we can have overlapping symptoms with different
Mhm.
type of conditions. And so it's
Mhm.
interesting you bring that up about trauma, because for those who don't know, and maybe a new audience in the trauma world, complex trauma, which is essentially like all of these little things that can kind of add up to create kind of this developmental trauma in your brain developing
Mhm.
differently, feeling unsafe, insecure, not getting your needs met. And so your brain starts being wired for survival and immediate, more of like a defense type mode, not really understanding nuances. And particularly with complex trauma, it's usually when there has been relational trauma and issues in
Mm.
relationships. So it's not always the fact of like heavy childhood abuse. Sometimes it's
Mhm.
just an emotionally immature parent who doesn't know how to support you through coping skills, and you think your
Mhm.
emotions aren't valid. And so you
Yeah.
have to learn how to meet your emotional needs elsewhere, right? Sometimes it's a parent
Mhm.
who's just working all the time and isn't really
Mhm.
around to support with that connection. It's not that there is this huge thing that you may hear about on the news, but it still is. There was some kind of need that you didn't get met that over
Mhm.
time can impact the way that your brain develops. Okay.
Yeah.
So, really, when, especially with complex trauma survivors, the relationship component is huge. The
Yeah.
rejection, the clinging, like it's
Mm.
either when you were saying that the number one thing you do when you kind of get that like feeling of rejection or, ooh, I did something
Mhm.
wrong is to run away.
Mhm.
I kind of push back a little bit now, but I used to fall into people pleasing.
Mm.
So if I thought maybe for a second that they didn't like me or I didn't fit in here,
Mhm.
then I would observe everything and be like, what do I need to be in order to be this for you?
Yeah.
But I was also holding some resentment deep inside that they didn't like
Mhm.
me. And so if something came up where there was a tiny something or a fight, or just eventually I would explode, go back to my
Mhm.
personality and be like, why don't you care about me? Why don't you like me? I went through so many friend groups growing up, probably the combination of like the complex trauma and the ADHD and not
Mhm.
knowing how to kind of vibe with people when there is conflict.
Yeah.
And so, it was more of like a reaction instead of a response, right? Where we're just immediately kind of just intuitively or automatically just taking those thoughts as that is fact and then just quick reaction based on that, right?
Yeah.
Whereas, like you were saying before, that other people who maybe don't have neurodivergence or don't have the trauma or anything else that kind of leads to that have these thoughts, but then they can sit with it and process it and say,
Mhm.
yeah, no, that's not true. Or they can just let it go.
Yeah.
We don't
Yeah.
let it
What
go
a
very
gift
easily.
to be able to let it go. I wake
I
up every day
wish.
wishing I could just let these things go. I think it's really interesting that you're tying this to people pleasing. And I talk about people pleasing a lot in my content and with my clients. And I
Mhm.
think we have a very narrow definition sometimes as a society of what that is. It's
Yeah.
just like saying yes to a lot of things, which is definitely people pleasing.
Yep.
But that feeling of becoming the person you think that they want you to be,
Yes.
that's really profound. And I definitely I did that in my primary relationship with my spouse for like so many years. He
Yeah.
definitely like I think fell in love with the real Meredith, but then the more I learned about how different we were in terms of like finances and organization and all of those
Mhm.
things, I decided I needed to be that person like him. Like I needed to be
Yeah.
a mirror of him. And that was really hard because I don't value all of the same things. We have enough of the core values that overlap.
Yeah.
But in my perspective, years ago in our early relationship was I'm not going to be safe with this person and I
Yeah.
really care about this person until I like become a financial guru
Yeah.
and I need to hide all of the impulse spending that has happened and he can't find out my credit score and all of this like
Mhm.
becoming someone they're not and exactly what you described. That doesn't bode well for long-term friendships, relationships, any of it, because
Yeah.
over time I was so mad at him for making me do that when he didn't make me do
Yes.
that, but I
Yeah.
had no understanding of anything that was unfolding,
Yeah.
all I knew, I was just angry for no reason.
Yep. And that's the thing, is it feels internally like someone made you do that. Right.
Yes.
Even though if you would have just been able to have a conversation, it may not have been that. Right. And here's the thing, even if there is the disagreement, or yeah, I actually don't love that you do this or whatever, but you know,
Yeah.
everyone has that happens. My parents genuinely did not like my personality. I was very different than my very stoic, calm, quiet, no emotions
Yeah.
mother. I'm this dynamic, goofy child. I am a lot for someone who has this much tolerance. And also, I was
Yeah.
undiagnosed neurodivergent. So my emotions were all over the place. Like self regulation was so hard for me as a child. Loud, goofy, all of those things that we equate with, like, you know, ADHD sometimes. Right. And so it was hard to feel like, okay, well, they don't like me and they're supposed to know me and love me. So if they don't like me, or, you know, I would find that like passing into friends too, like
Yeah.
this type of person or this type of personality reminds me of this person either I had a hard time with in the past, or, you know, like there's trauma or not, or just like there's a similar type of experience. And so sometimes I find that like with pattern recognition, I put that same experience from other people onto new people.
Yeah.
And then I'm mad at them because I immediately take the feelings I have on the old people or the other people that there actually maybe was conflict with, or it didn't go my
Yeah.
way. And then you're impacting other relationships that
Yeah.
maybe aren't like that. So that's one of the things in healing and awakening, especially with neurodivergence, is that a lot of the things that I would get upset about was like projecting from past things
Yeah.
onto current things.
Mhm.
And people would eventually get tired of it and be like, I can only give you so much reassurance.
Yeah.
Stop. You're attacking me for something that I'm not doing.
Yeah.
And I used to be like, take accountability, but like they weren't doing it. It was my brain that was telling me that this is
Yeah.
the same, right?
Yes, it's hard. I mean, nobody's perfect in any relationship, but I do think that that's a huge sign of growth that we can see when we are kind of creating situations that aren't quite what's happening.
Yeah.
And that was like, honestly, it was really hard to do that in my marriage. Nobody wants to be like, no, it's me. I'm the problem. It's me. Like, and it's a two-way street. We all are trying to improve and do the best we can. But like for me, it was also a gift to be able to like tie it all together and be like, okay, I've been neurodivergent for 30 some years, didn't know it.
Yep.
Thought I just sucked at everything and tried to hide it. And then it felt really icky to never be authentic and be a different person for every single different friend group. And then you're just exhausted. And when you can look at that and be like, okay, now I get it. Now I can see what's happening here. It doesn't mean that we're going to like navigate every situation perfectly from here on out. But we can like take that step back and, get a little more grounded in what we really want out of our relationships. We learn to communicate better. For me, it's such a gift to be able to like, say to a friend, like, hey, was I annoying last night? Or I feel that I was annoying. Like, it's a fine line because, like you said, you don't want to like constantly like beg for reassurance. But being able to discern with the right people, especially because of the people I value. Like I didn't send out a group message to the whole group. I'm obviously talking about it publicly now, so they might listen to it, but whatever. But like I went running with my friend this morning, and I was like, I had a really good time last night, but I can't shake the feeling that I was a little bit annoying. She was like, no, Meredith, you were hilarious. You were great. And it's like, I don't 100% believe her, but like, I am moving on from it now, sometimes we just need to externalize, like you said, we need to get that thought out of our head and knowing that sometimes that helps us, and knowing when we're like kind of probably pretty safe to do that, I think is helpful. And like in your situation, saying it sometimes leads to a conversation that needed to happen. Like it wasn't a fun communication probably, but that communication saved you guys from having bigger problems down the road. Likely.
Exactly. And when you have people who have communication skills, who can have those conversations, it's better. That's why I tell people like your environment, your social environment, the people in your life are so important. How you function, especially when you have neurodivergence or trauma, like when we have these tendencies, you are not an inconvenience. And I love how you were just able to just chat with your friend who you saw and just bring it up in like a nonchalant way, like, hey, is this, like, did this really, like, was I annoying? Right. And I think that like the difference in the approach can also change how it's received from someone else. Right. Whereas like you're just walking and talking, you're like, hey, I'm really feeling like maybe I was annoying, instead of being like, I know I was annoying. Oh my gosh. And like ruminating on it with
Yeah.
them, right? Be like, no, you're not telling me the truth. Or, and then
Right.
keeping it going, right? Or getting defensive when you come at it, right?
Yeah.
So it's, I think that a lot of these things comes down to our own self-regulation first, and then being able to bring it up
Yeah.
in order to, kind of convey what we're meaning. And sometimes it's not always going to come out right, especially with those like closest and we're always around. Maybe there's also like overstimulation or other factors or whatever that's going to happen. But what I find that's really powerful is that relationships in general are going to have conflict, and that's healthy. You're going to disagree. And there's going to be rupture, but there's this great concept of rupture and repair, and that repair is possible. And it's actually a natural part of a healthy relationship. And so many of us who are neurodivergent, like that just doesn't make sense. Right. It's like we had to figure out how to fit in this like social norm. A lot of us went to like these perfectionist tendencies, these masking, right? So when there is something wrong, you're like, oh, fix it, fix, right? Or run the other way. Or over internalizing that it's me. There's so many possibilities with that, right? But I think that for the people in your life, like you said, like you have a meaningful connection with, they feel safe to you, you know them well, they know you well, it's comfortable to do that. And your approach, I think, really can change how that goes. And I think that was a great way to like demonstrate to everyone who's listening how to go about that. I think it's really important.
Yeah, I mean, I think communication, I mean, it's no secret. Like all the relationship gurus out there are going to tell you, like, communication is like what this, those are the skills that make a healthy relationship, is having good communication skills. But I think what makes it so much more complicated for those of us that are neurodivergent is because we don't have the language around what we're experiencing to be able to communicate it. And especially if we've gone undiagnosed, and not just that, if we have, even if you're diagnosed as a child, a lot of times you're not given a lot of skills with that. Like I have neurodivergent children, and they get like accommodations at school, but they don't get any social emotional learning or anything like that. If they have a really good teacher, they might kind of like, teach them some things along the way, but it's really on the parent to guide that. And so many children have a parent that's not diagnosed with ADHD. So they go their whole life without having proper tools to be able to communicate what's happening in their head, what they need, how they're feeling, and be able to navigate that. And that's really, really hard. And it just snowballs after a while, where you really just think there's something inherently wrong with you. And there's not. There's just a different set of, I don't want to say rules because we don't like rules when we have ADHD, but there's just a different handbook. There's a different vocabulary that you need, and talking about it and learning about yourself and all of that is super important.
Yeah. And I just want to highlight how you shared that you internalize without understanding what's going on, that it must be you. And I just want to validate anyone who's done that. Like that was my whole history, like before. And, like I was like, it's me. It must be me. It must be me. Everything. Right. Whether it was just a nuance with like a conversation that was misunderstood, whether, cause I was raised by a narcissist. So everything they did, oh my gosh, I made them do that something. Right. But also it's like, any little tiny thing, if there's someone's upset, someone's laughing at the corner of the room, someone's quiet when you walk in, oh my gosh, what did I do? Right.
Yeah.
And so when we don't have the ability to kind of have the awareness, like I always say awareness is key, not only in that, like the awareness of symptoms that you may have, or, once you have a diagnosis and you can understand more and like understanding how the condition works and how your brain might work differently, or like, the RSD is even a thing, right? That can also kind of take away the, oh, it's not me. There are these things that are known. But also when it comes to awareness, it's self-awareness.
Yeah.
And being able to recognize in the moment when you are in this pattern, maybe when this is more of a trigger, maybe knowing like for you that when this happens, this is a tendency for you, right? Like you were talking about earlier, your tendency was to avoid. So you know that, and you can recognize, okay, in this situation, I normally avoid. So what am I going to do differently to start working through this? Or how am I going to notice this about myself if I can't access changing it right now? And just not let that control the situation or impact the relationship, right? So that self-awareness piece, which is like the first step of being able to regulate ourselves, is hugely important, right? And so like you said, the more we learn, the more we're around people who can give us genuine communication, helps build our own self-awareness, co-regulation as well. Like we're talking about the kiddos, like, and some, like you were talking about with kids, sometimes parents wake up to it and get their own level of awareness once things happen with their kids, or their kids are diagnosed, or someone, they start getting accommodations at school, and we know there can be a genetic component. So it's like, oh, wait, I do that. Wait, I thought I was just dysfunctional, or wait, I thought I was stupid or oversensitive or whatever, right? So that it really comes down to the awareness of all things, and not judging yourself as things show up, right? Because then it's just going to make it harder on ourselves. And sometimes if we aren't willing to like sit with that judgment on ourselves, which can kind of feel icky, which is valid, we can also take what we're feeling about ourselves and put that onto others. And that can lead to issues in relationships as well.
Totally. Absolutely. That can be a huge issue. Yeah. Self-awareness is key. And it's interesting because for your audience that has ADHD, self-awareness falls under the executive function umbrella. So literally the part of our brain that controls the executive functions has structural differences. So while that self-awareness is so important, a lot of us have to build that. I do think that with self-awareness, like the positive side of that is that I feel like that is something that we can train our brain to like get better at. Some things are much harder with ADHD to like override, but there is, I think, neuroplasticity, like just that particular skill can be built. And it can be super, super helpful. I mean, any human being working on self-awareness is one of the best things we can do, in my opinion.
I agree. And I totally, it is absolutely part of the executive functioning components that are impacted, right? So one of the things that I find is like when you can't internally process all of that, right? Something that helped in my own healing journey and that I, teach clients as well is like, give yourself actual evidence, go through, make it not necessarily about you, but let's talk about objectively what happened. And then I like to kind of play like Blue's Clues. What does this mean? Right? Like looking at this and saying, okay, so if someone who you weren't attached to at all, they didn't have any personal connection to you, if this happened, if they were thinking this objective situation, you've seen this, right? Then you can start to like logic brain through that when it's not assigned to you. So you're not kind of as overwhelmed by it and adding that component into it. But I also find like very visual. One of the things that helps me the most because I get that like negative circle of thoughts of just over and over, like, I don't know what's happening. I'm really stressed. I'm overwhelmed. I feel like I'm doing something wrong, but I can't quite like pinpoint what is happening. I just know I'm overwhelmed or I'm overstimulated or something is really hard for me right now. Some of my signs are like, I am a little bit more snippy or sassy or, or like, and I'm normally a very like, to warm and give you all the space you need kind of thing. So when I'm like really in urgency, I'm like, no, then I recognize, ooh, there's something going on with me. And like you said, that self-awareness piece. Okay, well, what, like, how do we figure that out? And there's something that my therapist taught me, and it's just basically like making a little tornado. But starting off with the first thing you notice, like, is there a thought that pops up? The behavior, maybe being, a little bit shorter with people. So starting off and then literally writing, being short, and then going, okay, what's underneath this tornado? What's underneath this tornado? And you kind of just like kind of go and almost your spiral, and you like start to unpack it in paper, like noticing this, what's underneath this, what's underneath this, what's underneath this, right? Or sometimes just brain dumping on paper to visually see what your thoughts are, what the perceptions are, and then take a break, come back to the paper, and start crossing off things that actually are not real. Or circling things that, oh, I want to pay attention to that. Right. And instead of doing that all in our brain, we kind of have some step-by-step visual cues of, hey, this is what's going on. And then you can have it right in front of you and be like, oh, this actually isn't as big of a deal as I thought. Or, oh, this is what's been under the surface. And it takes practice and takes time. But it can be really helpful to just, the more we're in our head, it's kind of like, have you ever, when you're like thinking of like the washing machine, okay, you're in the other room and all of a sudden you hear a ka-chunk, 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 and you're like, what is that? Right. And so you try and ignore it. And it just feels like it's getting louder, even though it's not. Somehow it feels like it's just getting louder and more annoying. And so you finally are like, oh, okay. And then you open up the washing machine, and at first, like looking in, you don't see anything that would be causing that loud noise. Right. But then once you start kind of pulling out one by one, you can say, it's definitely not this, until you find that thing that might be it. And then you realize, oh no, that, and you pull it out and it's still the ka-chunk, ka-chunk. And you're like, oh, well, that's not it. So then you have to go back and you got to pull out more until you find it. That's kind of sometimes like with the ruminating thoughts and that kind of thing, to figure out what's going on. And when you don't have all of that, like you said, the processing in your brain to do that, sometimes you need to just break it down one by one, and then the sound's gone for a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, it is definitely the getting it out of your head and into the world somehow, whether that's through that exercise that you shared, which is a fantastic exercise, a brain dump. Even like, if you don't like to write, do a voice memo and then listen to it and unpack it that way. Once you're out of that deep emotional reaction, I think that part you mentioned that. And I think it's important to like retouch on that, because sometimes when we're just completely emotionally dysregulated, none of that is going to feel accessible to us. But that, regulate. And then you're so right, because if we just like leave our brain to its own devices, that tornado is just going to get bigger. It's going to feed on other things. And if we can externalize and get to the bottom of like what's really happening here, then we have that, oh, okay, now I know better what I need to do to take care of myself in this moment, Absolutely. And I think that learning that skill, it doesn't always work beautifully and cleanly like we want it to, it doesn't take away the crappy feelings all of the time, but it does get us, I do think it helps us keep growing and keep being able to handle harder and harder situations with discernment. So Absolutely. We're always, we're going to keep having to deal with feelings that are not great. Like you said, even in a relationship, there's going to be rupture. It's going to be there. Like we can do all the work on all of these skills, and we're all human beings trying to figure out a world, so there's going to be conflict. Like there truly will be. And it's going to probably be in like any long-term valuable relationship, whether it's romantic or work or any of it, so understanding these things is so, so important. I think that there's a lot of complexity to a lot of these things that we could probably not even like scratch the surface.
I know.
But I think that if there's a takeaway from what you just said, it's that externalizing. Like we've got to find what our method is that helps us be able to start asking those important questions. Like once we can get to the bottom of it, we can ask ourselves, what else is possible? You know what I mean? Like, what's this really mean? Like we can start finding those powerful questions within that context.
Yeah, it's like that problem solving and like deeper reflection that can really illuminate some things for us as maybe even solutions, but also just like self-discovery, right? And self-discovery doesn't always have to be like, these are the things I think are wrong with me. Self-discovery can be like, I'm kind of funny and cute. Like, I actually have a quirky sense of humor. Like some people actually think that my goofy is actually
Yeah.
adorable, like whatever it
Yeah.
is, right? That I think people are like, oh, self-discovery. I don't want to know everything that's wrong with me, but it doesn't have to be. And I find that like once you learn to like integrate more of all of those sides of us, like humans, we all have flaws. We all have
Mm-hmm.
things. It doesn't matter if you're neurodivergent or neurotypical. It's truly like everyone has things that we deal with that, and also that not everyone's going to love. But
Mm-hmm.
sometimes what some people see as a flaw is actually something that others like really appreciate about the other. And I
Yeah.
think that like I think it's part of the reason why like neurodivergent relationships happen so often, friendships, whatever. Like we vibe
Mm-hmm.
together because we get it and we're not
Yeah.
being told we're too much or whatever. We can keep up with the process of
Right.
our brain and you're not being like, calm down, slow down, whatever, right? You're going to find your people the more
Mm-hmm.
you're you, right?
Yeah.
And the only way you can do that is just keep working through that deeper self discovery to
Mm-hmm.
then know how to show up. Cause like I said, I was a walking chameleon in all of my
Yeah.
social relationships
Mm-hmm.
and I didn't even know who I was. I
Yeah.
always assigned it to what I was to someone else. I didn't know who I was at all.
Right. I mean,
And
people
that's
would be
common.
like, I would have these interactions with people and they'd be like, oh, I love this Meredith. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, this
Yeah.
is the real me. I'm sorry. I've been showing you perfect stay-at-home mom me for 10 years,
Yeah.
acting like I care about the homework assignment or whatever topic that I've been like suffering through, and you're not going to be for everyone. There's plenty of people that like, they're not bad people, but they're just not like somebody I want to hang out with all the time. And that's
Yeah.
fine. And no one wants, a lot of us just really want everyone to like us. Like,
Yes.
that's a very human thing.
Mhm.
But it's just impossible. It's an impossible goal. But that
Yeah.
perfectionist, people pleasing side that we just kind of start to develop, from all the messages we receive throughout our life
Yeah.
really can be hard to let go of, like that's a coping mechanism. Like we felt like that was keeping us safe for a really long time.
Yeah.
So when we do start to like go to a party and unmask a little bit and tell our hilarious jokes and be charismatic, it doesn't feel as safe as like being the chameleon did,
Yeah.
so there's going to be uncomfortable components with that.
Yeah. And sometimes we are the one who it starts off fun and then it's too loud and you're like, oh, right. And like I think there are ways like so even just like meeting new people or in the party aspect or whatever it may mean is like I think that we can find ways to the difference between masking and accommodating. Like we can
Mm,
if we hit a point where sometimes, oh yeah, maybe I am getting a little excited about this for this social
yeah.
situation, I think it can be okay for us to recognize that and pull back without internalizing something like something is wrong with me. Right.
Exactly. And that's what's so tricky about all of this. Like
Mm-hmm.
we talk about unmasking and being authentic,
Mm-hmm.
but like, we can't roll into a group meeting and think everyone's going to be fine with us dominating the
No.
conversation and not hearing anyone else because they want to be heard too.
Yep.
So it's a very, very nuanced, I feel like.
Yeah.
And I love how you put that we can recognize like, okay, I have literally been talking for 20 minutes and this person over here kind of looks like they want to say something. Like
Yeah.
that's something that's really, I think we're good at too, is we are noticing so many things, but like knowing like it's not masking to like notice someone else's needs and give them the floor for a little while.
Yeah.
It's when we literally are like white knuckling it through every social interaction
Mm-hmm.
and running this script the whole time in our head, like, who do they want me to be? Like, oops, I said that wrong. I gotta, like it's that like very strong feeling of like putting on a performance for people.
Yeah.
And I think there's a difference, but
Yes.
like it can be very confusing because then we talk about unmasking and then we're all like, sorry, not sorry, like running around and like,
Well,
like I mean, sorry, not sorry is something I do say and mean,
oh,
but
for
like,
sure. Yeah.
but there is that feeling of like, okay, we need to respect other people's boundaries. Like if unmasking
Mm-hmm.
means that we just like, we can't just roll around doing whatever we want all the time. Like
Yeah.
nobody wants that either. So
Yeah.
finding that sweet spot where we are being authentic, but we also, are doing it without like self-shaming, like
Yeah.
being able to like speak out of turn and then just be like, okay, I'm sorry, you have the floor and move on from it versus like holding on to that script. Okay, like now I messed up.
Yeah,
I should say nothing the rest of the day,
absolutely.
and that can be very hard for us with when the RSD starts showing up and we start like assuming the reaction and having that like very big assessment of the situation.
I agree. And, that's why I think that like that self-work is so important
Mm-hmm.
because we can do that more easily and have more of the context and the nuance of based on the role you're in or based on the environment,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, I don't care if my doctor has any form of neurodivergence. If they come in and just talk to me about their special interest for 10 minutes, I'm going to be annoyed, right? Or
Mm-hmm.
that's not part of the role right now, right? Their role is to help with
Mm-hmm.
the care and treatment. So even if their brain is like, oh, I want to connect, that's not the role. That's not what's appropriate in that setting, right? Like as an
Right.
occupational therapist, when I was working clinically with kiddos and talking with parents, when I switched to talking with parents, I had to shift as to differently from than I was with the kids, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
it's a different environment, it's a different
Yeah,
appropriateness, level of understanding. And
totally.
also, I'm going to be different when I'm talking with parents of, and clients than I am
Mm-hmm.
going to be when I'm talking with my friends. And that doesn't mean that I'm not authentic. That means that we all
Right.
have different sides of us and different
Mm-hmm.
aspects of self and communication or whatever that we
Yeah.
pull out in different areas. Like people who hear me on the podcast are so funny. So like, you're totally different than online. Online, I'm a little bit more quirky and whatever and that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But that's like my safe space. And that's me sharing a lot of my personal
Mm-hmm.
journey. But in a professional context, I'm still all of that person, but I can show up in a different way and just have a
Yes.
different part of me turned on, right? Like leader
Mm-hmm.
entrepreneur Tay is here as opposed to just the goofy healing her inner child, right?
Yeah.
But those parts aren't lost because our true
Right.
self is integration of it all.
Yeah. 100%. And that's what I think is hard to understand sometimes. It's like it's okay to
Mm-hmm.
be a different person in different situations. It's not inherently bad. But
Yeah.
it's if that person is like we're just pushing away a whole true self to like
Yes.
please someone else, and being able to discern that is, I think, a helpful skill to continue working. I mean, it's work. It's
Yeah.
not like point A to point B, like we're not like there, like it's
Yeah.
one of those continual things that we can, keep growing and learning around.
Yeah. And I think one of the ways to recognize that is my nervous system activated? Do I feel like maybe this is
Mm,
like is this more of like a stress response or a trigger response or like, or
mm-hmm.
is this me feeling calm, collected in my body, that
Yeah.
kind of as I'm navigating this, or is maybe this doesn't feel like myself. And even when
Mm,
you're different parts of yourself, like you can come off as, like you're talking faster or, you just have these thoughts that are different or unlike you when you're feeling
mm-hmm.
confident, collected, that kind of thing. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So like, again, being able to recognize like that self-regulation is huge because once we kind of can figure out, oh, this is what happens when, I'm reacting to something. This is how my body reacts. This is how I'm
Mm-hmm.
showing up. These are my little behaviors or things that I do, right? Then
Yeah.
you can be like, oh, that's when you come back to yourself in more of like a regulated, balanced state where we're not just immediately reacting or
Mm-hmm.
trying to control, right? Always trying to control things. That is an activation of your nervous system. That is a survival
Mm-hmm.
response, right?
Yeah.
Even if it's I want to be the one who's always making the plans with everyone, I want to make sure everyone shows up on time, I want to whatever, that's your nervous system being activated. It may
Yeah.
come up as like anxiety, but you're allowed to control, like when we're more regulated, we control what we can, and we're allowed to kind of let the rest of things unfold naturally.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure
Yeah.
some people went, let anything unfold without me having
Yes. No, we can't do that.
what?
Yes. It's hard. I mean,
Oh
it
my
is.
gosh.
So it's so hard sometimes, I think, when we've had those
Yeah,
tendencies as like part of our identity for a long time. And honestly, like our society rewards a lot of those identities.
it does.
Like when I first started talking about perfectionism and really like seeing the negative impact it had on me and my family, like there were people that didn't want to hear that message that were in my immediate circles
Yeah.
because like we reward striving for excellence, we reward it's packaged in all kinds of different words,
Mm-hmm.
and there's nothing wrong with having big goals and having like things that you care deeply about,
Yeah.
but when that's across the board and it's like it's an impossible standard versus a high standard, and it's like across the board in everything we do, even things that may or may not matter very much at
Yeah.
all. It's exhausting and it's not really beneficial to the people around us either.
No.
So yeah, I like completely forgot where I was going with this. I'm so sorry. Very ADHD
No,
moment.
honestly,
oh yes, I was talking
you're
about
good.
how society rewards us. Like people say I'm a control freak, and we're like, it's kind of like a badge of honor, like, and so, really understanding those behaviors and how at times they can become coping mechanisms versus actual things that are helping us
Yep.
is kind of hard to swallow, especially if that's your mode of operation for a lot of years.
Yeah. And, if you do want to grow and learn and develop, you're going to have to be really honest with yourself.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's not going to be pretty.
Yeah.
And I would say, at least at the beginning, at least like half of my personality was like, oh, this is a trauma response, or, oh, this is what everyone else wants me to be, or, like I am masking. Right. And so it can be really hard to sit with that, but also understanding that when you kind of hit those points of, oh, this is what's going on, I challenge you and encourage you to meet yourself with like a gentleness and compassion, because what happens is a lot of us would extend that type of care and compassion and forgiveness or understanding to others. But when it comes to ourselves, we are our own worst critic. Right.
Yeah.
And it's so funny because like I was definitely that way, and that very caring, very compassionate, going out of my way. I was the helper, whatever you need. But the moment that I screwed up, what is wrong with you? How dare you? You're horrible. You're stupid. All in absolutes, never allowing mistakes, never allowing nuances. And that you're actually like fighting against your own self-growth. Even if you like understand what's happening now, you hit this wall of, oh, I'm so stupid, or, oh, whatever. And that's the thing, is like that pattern can also come from like our negative self-beliefs, which if you were diagnosed with neurodivergence late in life, that could be traumatic.
Yeah.
There's a grief process that goes with that of, this is what was missed. This is, how do people not understand? Why didn't people care? Why didn't I have the support? Right. I thought this was me, and just so much with that understanding now is that instead of just going, all right, I'm going to be angry at the world, I'm going to be mad at myself, why didn't anyone get this? I'm really going to challenge myself to look in with compassion and say, you're a human. You know what you know. And now that you know better, you can start to do better or do differently. Right. And that's okay, because we're always naturally growing and shifting. But the more awareness we get, the harder it can be at first.
Yes, it can be very, very hard to have that awareness at times. Like I'm thinking about, there's actually like a reel that I reposted in my Instagram content yesterday from a relationship coach. Her name is Chris Conley. And she discussed the concept of understanding that neurodivergent people sometimes will have like a lower level, like we have lower levels of dopamine, we process it differently, all of these things, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes when we're in those lower states, our brain is searching for the dopamine no matter how it gets it. It doesn't care. Like it, and we're not conscious of it always, right?
Yeah.
And so she was saying like the example of, she was kind of like picking fights a little bit. That's not exactly what she said. But like, I'll talk to it from my own experience, but like kind of like causing a little drama in your relationship. Because our brain, like that's dopamine for our brain, is a little bit of conflict, like, and our brain isn't like sitting here being like, well, this isn't really healthy for us. It's just kind of like doing it.
Yep.
And I mean, I see this like when we were all super bored during the pandemic and people were maybe like saying things on the internet that they would have never said before,
So much.
and that is dopamine seeking. And I remember when I learned about this for the first time, and I put it in the context of my own relationships. And I'm like, I do that. I literally will be freaking bored.
Yeah.
And I will cause drama with my husband. And I'm like, that sucked to learn that. That was not a fun self-awareness, and having to like see that it can be really easy, like you said, to be like, to turn that into like, oh, there's something wrong with me that I do this versus, oh, now that I see this, I can change that, or I can notice, okay, you're being a little snippy. Maybe you need to find dopamine in a better way than that. Maybe you need to go for a run. Maybe you
Yeah.
need to like get some sunshine. Maybe you need to read a good book that has drama in it and it doesn't cause any harm to anybody else, you
Yep.
know? So
Yeah.
it's a rough path sometimes.
Yes.
And sometimes it just feels easier to be like, well, we're waving the white flag. We don't need to keep working on this stuff
Yeah.
because it is not always a fun time. And
Yeah.
there are going to be moments where we like remember things and they feel really icky to us and get us really emotionally dysregulated. But like that, you have to build that compassion first. Like, I think that should be the first thing that we do. And then
Yeah.
we dig deeper into those things so that I can see that and be like, wow, that must have really sucked for my husband. But I'm
Mhm.
seeing it now and I'm going to forgive myself and I'm going to hope that he can understand this too. And we can like move forward together, you know?
Yeah. And I'm so glad that you brought that up about like the dopamine seeking and how
Mm-hmm.
it can show up in terms of like creating conflicts. And this
Mm-hmm.
actually brings me back to exactly what I was going to talk about earlier. There's another form of dopamine seeking when you just meet people or you put
Mm-hmm.
your ideas on someone, you start
Mm-hmm.
fantasizing the weird pattern recognition, right? And there's this
Mm-hmm.
trend that it's like term that has started showing up on TikTok called like a delusion ship. And this
Oh, I
is
have not heard
one.
of that.
Oh,
Yeah.
I am so guilty. I am
Yes.
so guilty.
Oh
Like
my
this is like
God.
my whole body right now, which wants to run and hide. Like I'm so embarrassed.
I have not heard that on the TikTok yet. And I am like sitting here like,
Oh,
that was like literally my entire 20s
yeah.
and even
Yes.
friendships, all of it. Oh my goodness. Like,
Yeah, it's just this idea that like you
wow.
invent what you want in other
Yeah.
people or that you put more importance on things. It's like
Mm,
the people who go on one date and have already have your kids' names like all
yes.
lined up and you realize, oh, this fits here and you make this fit here and this is so compatible and oh my gosh, they really liked me here or the flirtation with the coffee guy where you're like, he
Oh my
looked at
gosh.
me. He must
All
really
of
like
the
me.
stories.
Love of my life. Like, oh my God, like, oh my gosh. And then when there's more evidence to it, there, am I really telling the story? Yes, I am. Okay. So
Yes, I'm ready for
only because I
it.
know people are gonna relate. And this is like one of my deepest sources of shame, and it never got resolved. And it's just anyways, okay. So I'm someone who is a little spiritual woo-woo. I believe everything happens for a reason. I believe in signs. And then sometimes when you put together signs and ADHD and pattern recognition and attachment trauma, we end up creating delusionships or we see what we want to see sometimes,
Yeah.
right? So I had recently just like also I'm a hopeless romantic. So it's like those things we like the happenstance and oh, if this thing happens, this is so romantic or this spontaneous thing, this must
Yeah.
mean so much more, right?
Yeah.
So I recently broke up with a very serious boyfriend I was living with, had known since high school, was one of my really good friends, and for years, and then eventually felt safe enough to get into a relationship. And it just turned out we romantically were incompatible and at different spaces in terms of healing. And we're
Mm-hmm.
just triggering each other constantly and ended things. And in that also ended the friendship because it got really messy and not fun.
Mm-hmm.
And so I, in my mind, like everyone had 4 years, like parents had married us off since we were
Yeah.
teenagers. And I had
Mm-hmm.
known this person for 13 years at this point. And so in
Mm-hmm.
my mind, I was like, well, this is the storybook romance.
Yeah.
I friend zoned him for so long. He's always been there. He's been the safe person. He's seen me
Mm-hmm.
through all the ups and downs. We move in together. We love each other happily ever after. It didn't
Mm-hmm.
end that way.
Yeah.
And so because my environment around me, like everyone expected us to get married, even when we were just friends.
Yeah.
It's like that one we were just
Mm-hmm.
waiting for. It
Mm-hmm.
didn't happen and it's not going to happen. And so I think part of my way of coping with that was I met someone
Mm-hmm.
circumstantially. And there was a similar sign that I saw when I ended my relationship. Like when they left, I saw basically like the number 1212 and like I assigned number meanings, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And I looked it up and essentially it was like beginning or like ending of a relationship that it really isn't meant to be, but stepping into one that is. And in terms
Mm-hmm.
of romance, especially, and it was literally, I saw that very clearly when he walked out the door. It was the only time I've ever seen that number. And there was also
Mm-hmm.
another number that was equated to him. Okay.
Yeah.
So I hadn't seen that number since. Been a couple months, and I'm living alone in the house where we used to live together. It's a whole thing. And I'm getting ready to go on like this solo trip to see like the girls up the coast of California, post breakup,
Mhm.
whatever. And I stop in to see one of my friends at a gym that she's working at, essentially. And she was like working out, and she's like, you should come in also and like meet my trainer. And I was like, okay. And then like it was a whole thing where I was off my game, running late, whatever. Walked in this man, oh my gosh, gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous, kind, and like just very good energy, right? And I was like, oh, this is an attractive man. Okay, well, note
Mhm.
there, whatever. And then talking to my friend and whatever. And one of the things, like I am that level of woo-woo. I was like, here, because like she basically what happened is like she picked up a crystal in my house that she liked, and she was like, I really
Mhm.
like this. So I went to go get her one to say thank you and surprised her and whatever.
Mhm.
But then she gave the crystal to the man, and the man
Mm.
held it and was like, ooh, I really like this. And my mind was like, that's my
Soulmate.
soulmate. That's it. Whatever. Like a man who's not immediately repulsed by all of this or whatever, is tall, is gorgeous, is literally my type.
Mhm.
Like, oh my gosh, this is it. And then like also like he went and like I went to go give him a handshake, whatever. And then he gave me a hug, and I was like, oh my gosh. Right. So like,
Mhm.
and then all in my head and whatever. And then I get in the car, and then I see the number 1212 three separate times within 5 minutes of
Mm.
meeting this man. And so I've convinced myself, this is the one. This is the wrong
Yeah.
one. This is what I've been waiting. Oh, the level of, I thought about this man nearly for 2 years. I met him once, saw
Oh
him
my
again
gosh.
randomly a year later. I was convinced that something was going to happen. I was so convinced that he must like me too. Like, even though, like, literally when I saw the man in person, like, couldn't get further enough away from me. Like, we were randomly, like, in like a group event thing, didn't know he was going to
Mhm.
be there. And it's like kind of like tied to like a friend of a friend, right? So,
Mhm.
like, in a group conversation talking with all these people, then he comes down later, didn't realize I was talking to his friends, and I was like, oh great, this dude thinks I'm stalking him now.
Mhm.
And like full body turn away from me in group conversation, not even wanting to say like talk to me at all, like why is this girl
Mm.
here? I was like telling the friends, I was like, oh my gosh, I think this is my person. Like, also like, ugh, like how embarrassing.
Yeah.
Like the literally he just like, it was just so triggering to me. And I was like trying to figure it out so much. I was like, why is this so important to me? Why can I not stop
Yeah.
thinking about this man? Like something about him and blah, blah, blah. And I was just like literally making more stories up in my head as to like that he could just be a dude. But I was like, oh, but what if this, and what if, oh, and this,
Yeah.
this had to happen for this to happen. And then, and I was just like,
Yes.
oh my, literally
Yeah, like
had
that's
to
going to be
talk to
just
the
part
dude.
of the Lifetime movie, right? That he was mean to you
Oh,
at that party. And
yes.
then he's going to call you and be like, I just wasn't emotionally ready. Like, we are
Exactly.
so imaginative. Like, that is one thing I love about ADHD is like, we are so creative. We are so imaginative. Like, but
Mm,
sometimes we make stuff up and have a whole
yeah.
backstory. Like, I'm listening to the story and it's like bringing me back
Uh, yeah.
to the fact, okay, Taelor, I am 43 years old.
Yeah.
I had a Target boyfriend when I was
Yep.
17 years old. And his name was Brian. And I would like go in his line and he was nice to me. And I felt like
Mm-hmm.
there was a vibe.
Yep.
He was
Yep.
just being nice to me. He was
I
just
know.
doing his job. And his name was Brian. I had like a whole backstory. I just was waiting for that moment to happen. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
and it was going to be the cutest story. And we were going to like tell it at our wedding. And we are going to have 87 kids.
Yeah.
And like,
Yep.
we are so, so creative with these stories. And I think that one, it can make our life more interesting sometimes. Like, again,
Yeah.
we're looking for dopamine. Like,
Yeah.
we need something to think about. And it's not always harmful. Like, I joke around a lot with my husband. Like, we'll meet people here or there out and about, and I'll be like, I'll like create an entire backstory for them and tell my whole family the backstory. And they're like,
Yep.
Meredith, you don't know any of that. And I'm like, and I know I don't know that. And I'm just having fun right now. I
Yep.
just like creating stories, but like I can recognize what I'm doing. But like when you're in that like what would you call it? A delusionship?
Delusionship.
You are actually believing this.
Yeah.
Like I really thought that Brian and Target and I, it was just a matter of time, like we were gonna connect when Brian didn't know who I was.
Nope.
He asked me a couple questions about what high school I went to, and you know what I mean? And these things, like, there was definitely a TA in college that I was having a delusionship with. Like, this is not just you, Taelor. I think this is a lot of people, and I'm glad you told that story, because it's one of those where we're so embarrassed when we look at it.
So embarrassing.
It's also hilarious. I mean, but
I know it's funny. It's funny now.
Funny when you're outside of it, but in the time, you do think that person there is some thread. We are so I feel like intuition is one of those ADHD strengths that, like, a lot of it is pattern recognition, but like at times we can read the room really good. We are connecting dots other people can't see, but that skill can also make us think things that are real that aren't real, like the delusionship, or like, sometimes things they just are what they are. So anyways, yes, I think recognizing that is super, super important. Like being able to discern reality with like our brain just like being freaking bored and like needing to entertain us, and like noticing, okay, I'm having a delusionship with the Target guy. Maybe I need a hobby right now. Like maybe I need to like learn something new, versus like, okay, we're like writing in our diary about this.
And that's the thing too, is like, I think that it's like, if you're just having a delusionship in your head and like, it's cute, whatever, and you think about it every once in a while, like that happens, right? But the challenge I find, and actually I was triggered by this delusionship of that, I felt so rejected by this person because they didn't actually reach out. And it like my friends were feeling kind of weird because they're like, oh, I know you both, and this is, and like I'm not as close with those friendships anymore, and like that was a weird vibe, and like I was like weird and oversharey and whatever, and like obviously it makes sense the dude would be like, what is wrong with that lady, right? Like if the friends were like, just right? Like, so I'm sure I probably like scared the dude, which sir. But it's it's not you, it's me. But it's like, it's so interesting because one of the things for me was that I would find that when there weren't things going on as much in my life, then I would go back to, this fantasy. What would we do? Where could we live? I wonder when they're going to reach out to me. I wonder this. I wonder what I need to do to get back into seeing them again. Or and then the other thing was like the control. I want to figure this out. If this is the thing, I'm going to be the one responsible for making it happen. And here's the thing, maybe there was some kind of connection there, but because my reaction was a very triggered state of, okay, now what do I do about it? Instead of just letting things naturally unfold, is that I was like randomly reaching out and like, hey, this, hey, you want to do this? Hey, and it was just like really weird. It's like, this is basically a stranger, but it's like, I was trying to figure out where this fit and trying to make something fit. Right. And so it was like, no, that's not right. So like, and I'm not going to say that like, I might have intuitively felt something. Absolutely. But it might've just been like, this is a good person to know this, like there, we can have, that's one of the hard things for me too, is that we can have connections with people or just like, vibe well with people. And maybe they're not going to be a permanent part of our life. Maybe they're not even going to be a part of our life. We can have fleeting, that was a nice moment, and be okay. Right. But I think for those of us who have more of that neurodivergence, is that we also have these hyperfixations. And so also thinking about what you've talked about on your page a lot with relationships is like people who move really fast and like love bombing in relationships. When things are reciprocated, then we move faster and we make it happen faster, and we get hyperfixated, and then things fizzle out quickly. Because we're like, well, what happened? You're not building a foundation. You're building upon a fantasy, right? You're building upon what you want it to be, and you're missing a lot of things, or you're having the rose-colored glasses and missing some red flags, and you're making a story fit that you want to fit. And that also can impact relationships. So whether it's like a delusionship where there absolutely is nothing, or it's like there is like a newer relationship, those things can show up in that we do get fixated. And I have found, I don't know about you, but like I would have hyperfixations on like my fantasies growing up as a child, like these stories in my head. And then I would have to come back to this. And what does this mean? And, you know, and like for me, I was escapism because I grew up in a household that wasn't safe or calm or whatever. So I just had this fantasy version of life in my head that I would go back to. And I find myself as an adult when I'm stressed being like, this fantasy sounds better. Now let's go back to this. Or, and it's almost an avoidance technique, right?
Yeah.
But it's not uncommon. And I actually was talking to a friend recently who got in a relationship quickly, told everyone way before needed to, like super excited about it, and very clearly was not compatible. And the level of shame there that's like, oh, yeah, I missed that, or I feel naive, or I feel stupid, or whatever. And then it's, you know, and that's a very common pattern of, you know, I mean, you saw my whole body. Anyone who's watching, I was like, I don't like this. This is
yes, yes, yeah.
But
it's
like,
hard.
It happens, right? And I think just being able to own that and like that happens sometimes, and we can learn from it.
It's so true. I mean, like what you touched on how like we can meet that person, we click, and there is something there, whether it's a friendship or a relationship, like, but you know, we go like so deeply, so quickly, and it feels so, so good. And that's a dopamine thing too. Like we're getting so many good brain chemicals, and it's kind of like setting us up to crash. Because one of the biggest things we deal with ADHD is like being intolerant of boredom. So that like level of interest in anything, like when it's new, is never going to be sustainable. And if we have ADHD, we're going to hit that boredom faster and sooner. And then we're going to abandon stuff because we're like, okay, the faucet is now off. And this isn't right, even though there is a good, like there may be some really deep compatibility there. And if we don't recognize that, it's like this normal reaction, and understand like how to like, you know, be able to like still get that pleasure and good feelings of being with that person and not expect it to be what it is at the beginning, then we just keep moving on to the next one, you know, and that pattern over time, then that's like the person that's like, I've been married 7 times and feels all this shame because they truly felt such deep things for this person, but didn't know they were dealing with like this big boredom crash, you know, where the dopamine was going away, and they didn't have the tools to like communicate through it and, you know, guide decisions differently. Like I talked to a lot of ADHD couples. They're like, we got married on the 4th date or whatever. And some people it works out, you know, like a lot of people it does. And I married my husband. We've been together a year before we got engaged, and then got married 9 months later. So it's not like that was a long-term thing. That's decently fast. And, you know, like when that boredom hits, you just are like, it's so uncomfortable that we just want to like not be in that discomfort, instead of like figuring out how do we build that back up? How do we move? Like, how do we change expectations and communication? And when we don't know that tendency as an ADHDer, and it's not just relationships, it's jobs, it's hobbies, it's all of it, everything. And we have to understand that like boredom piece and how to cope with that and not let it sabotage all of these things that are so important to us, you know?
Yeah. So. I think that's so important. Like you're saying, like it's dopamine and reflecting upon, boredom. But I'm also thinking like, how often do people misconstrue boredom as, you know, when it's really safety? And if you're used to chaos and the ups and downs and fix it and the whatever, safety feels really boring. Stability feels really boring.
We don't think we want that.
But actually, like that's actually the kind of thing that I'm looking for in a relationship now is something that goes slower and whatever. And like full transparency, I recently met someone and I was like, like I'm 30, right? So like baby clock is ticking, all of these things, whatever. And like I'm not someone who like prioritizes relationship, but it was like a happenstance thing, and very kind, obviously, like you can tell just like a genuinely interesting, capable human. And I'm not going over the top of like, ooh, what if it did it? I'm not fantasizing anymore. Thank you. Me. But you know, like communicating and whatever, and just kind of saying like, hey, like if this works out or not, but like I've got some deadlines going on. You have a busy week. I have a busy week. Let's not worry about talking all the time. And you know, if you still want to get together for whatever, we can do that. But I'm not like over obsessing over, is he going to text me? Is this going to happen? Like,
Yes.
whatever, like what we're going to have these babies and move here. And like, yeah, there were a lot of things. I'm like, we had a wonderful, deep conversation and I can definitely see some compatibility. And I'm like, I could see potential for something, but I'm not forcing it early on and I'm not trying to rush things.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's actually like, I realized like just the way this person's like energy and demeanor is just very like calm and like still confident and like very like masculine assertive energy, but like you can tell it's very healthy and wanting to move slow and just get to know me. Didn't even like comment on my looks or whatever, just wanted to get to know me and having like kind conversation. It was just very nice. And then still at the end being like, hey, this was a really great conversation. Can we go out and do something? And that was great. Right. And so it was just a comment, even if it's just, this is a friend, cool. But like, it's not the force of, oh, okay. And like, I'm already thinking like, if something with this person, just the way that they've kind of shown up, like if something were to develop with this, it would be something that's more slow moving. And I say that's what I want, but also, oh my gosh, I'm throwing things around. Sorry, guys. I say that's what I want, but also when it comes down to like, you know, originally when he didn't text me back right away the first time, there was a part of me that was like, oh no, it's gonna be this. And I had to like regulate myself and come back and be like, no, that's not in alignment with your true self. That's a trigger. That's a whatever. We're not going to get lost in that. We're not going to repeat a cycle, whatever. It's like, and being able to recognize that like, if he does reject me, one, it might not be about me. Two, it, you know, it's going to be okay because I know who I am and I believe that I'm going to be okay regardless. And it's like, I don't need something to fill a hole anymore because I feel very good where I am. So it's allowing it to naturally develop, but also recognizing that like this dude is pretty stable, calm, grounded energy. It's not going to be someone who's going to be like, oh my gosh, you're amazing. Let's move in together. Right. Because that ends up being not healthy. So 4 years ago, I would have been like, oh, this guy's boring. But now I'm like, ooh, this guy is stable. This guy is kind.
Amazing growth.
Right? And I'm like, okay. So it's just recognizing that like maybe sometimes it's like when it comes to the partners we pick, we're looking for that instant gratification. And that's not always the best for foundational relationships, romantic or business,
right?
Or anything else. Like, I don't know about you, but like I'll vibe with people and be like, oh my gosh, we have to do something right away. Like this has to happen or whatever. Like see this, there's so many possibilities and you vibe with someone as an entrepreneur, especially because like I love collaborations. And then it's like they have something going on or it's not the time right now, or they're not talking about this topic that you want or whatever it is. And just something is just like, it doesn't quite work. And then you're like, you could internalize this as, did I mess up? Did I whatever? Or you can just recognize it's like, this happens all the time. And humans are humans and life is life. And even if something is a great connection and there's so much possibility, all of the possibility doesn't have to happen right now.
Totally. Yeah. We are very much like, we want what we want in that moment. It's very hard for us to like get out of that. And I think it really shows up in relationships. And, you know, it's hard for us to think about our future self with ADHD, like it, and thinking about, you know, I mean, I've been married for, gosh, I shouldn't have to think about this, 18 years. But we've gone through lots of ups and downs. And my husband is everything you just described. He is very stable. He is a great provider. He is wonderful. Like he is so supportive of me. We are like the yin and the yang, like we are a good balance. But there are periods, especially I think with any relationship over that long of time, where you're just going to be like discontent in your life or bored or whatever. And if you know, put that need to get out of that higher than that need for that long-term support and safety and all those wonderful qualities that you desire. I think it's very, very common for people with ADHD. I mean, all human beings probably do this, but like, I think especially with ADHD, because our boredom intolerance is not great. And it literally is a chemical thing for us. It feels much more uncomfortable to us. And that can be a whole shame spiral thing too. Like I would notice myself in these patterns and be like, you were married to the greatest guy on earth, but you are bored with your life right now. And it's like I could recognize that on some level, but when I didn't know I had ADHD, not tolerating boredom was like a huge source of shame for me. Like I remember being told a lot as a kid, like, it's okay to be bored. And it is, but like, also like boredom felt a lot different to me than it did to a neurotypical child. you
Yes.
know? And
Mm-hmm.
so there's different ways to cope with that, but
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to shut it down. Like I wanted to not be feeling that.
Yeah.
And that just creates like a bunch of other, like we're not solving the problem now. We're just like deflecting and it's just messy.
Yeah.
So it's just coming back to what we've been saying this whole time, that like understanding our tendencies and understanding how we're wired
Mm-hmm.
is so, so important if we want that future self to like have the things that we want outside of in that moment, the excitement, because we love the
Yeah.
excitement so much. It's so fun to be in a new exciting relationship when you click with someone, but like you said, it all doesn't have to unfold in that moment. Like we
Yeah.
can work on letting things happen naturally instead of trying to control the narrative and make it happen now, and all of that.
Yes. And then, when we do that, it might not end up the way we want it to anyways. And
Right.
then there's really no one to blame but ourselves for
Like none of us have a crystal
pushing.
ball. None of us know what the
Yeah.
future is holding for us.
Mm-mm.
And we can make decisions that inform the outcomes that we want. But like at the end of the day, you might end up having a beautiful story with this person, but it's still not going to be the same story that your brain is creating. And
Nope.
like that's what we need to know, is
Yep.
that this wonderful strength of storytelling and creativity and interest that ADHDers have can also be like our Achilles heel. So noticing that. And I love that TikTok is telling us about delusionships and giving us some ways to like feel less.
Yep.
We're the only one going through this,
Yeah, truly. And, it's also like you can hurt your own feelings by your own stories
Yeah.
sometimes too, right?
Oh,
Like you just
yeah.
like all of the level of expectation that you can put onto experiences or jobs or whatever. You build things up so much and the story just keeps going on and on in your head.
Mm.
And then reality ultimately doesn't match the story because
Yeah.
it can't when you're in this totally like I am a like prized author right now in my brain, right? Like you said, even if it's wonderful, it's still not going to match. So then we're kind of allowing ourselves to like have that let down or feel rejected more, or right. And then we put that on top of like the pattern recognition and the RSD and all of those things. And it just like compiles. And
Yeah.
then if we aren't doing our self-awareness work or, like the self-discovery and working on self-love and how to kind of meet our needs for ourselves instead of always like looking to others to get those needs met, and we're just kind of in a vicious cycle. And so, yeah,
Yeah.
it comes out in our relationships, but it also comes out, like you said, in our jobs and our work. And it really comes down to like cultivating a relationship with ourselves and learning how to meet our own needs
Totally.
while knowing how we operate. And I think that's part of just like especially with like late diagnosed neurodivergent, especially women, just the way in the society and the patriarchy and all of these things, how we're expected to be certain things.
Yeah.
And, it's like the nuance of coming together and unmasking and seeing things differently and whatever, but also kind of going back, and it's like a healing journey with yourself.
Yeah, definitely.
And that self-acceptance is huge. And that's ultimately where we want to get to. But
Yeah.
Meredith, we could talk for hours.
I know.
I love this conversation. Seriously. I mean, I'm sure you'll be on, we'll do stuff together back and forth for sure. But I do want to wrap it up for now. Because I think we had a really meaningful conversation about relationships and all of the things. So thank you for that. As people are listening and maybe you're not familiar with you and are going to want to connect with you, can you share a little bit more about what you do, where to connect with you, and what you have going on right now?
Yeah, so you can find me primarily on Instagram. My username is Hummingbird_ADHD. I show up there quite frequently. I'm also like trying out the threads. We're going to see where that goes. I was never a Twitter girly, but we're going to try this. I kind of like it. So find me there too. I run a community for adults with ADHD called the Hummingbird Hive. And we get together and have great conversations. We do some productivity things to like really get us on track towards what we want. We have an entrepreneur group in there. And that's like a low cost accessible option for anyone that's looking for some ADHD support. So you can find information on that if you follow me on Instagram. And I'm also writing my first book right now, which has been a big roller coaster of RSD and emotions, and turning my manuscript in at the end of this month that we're recording, not this month, July, August. My brain is already into August. That won't be coming out until next summer, but I know podcasts live on the internet forever. So for anyone that's listening in 2024, you can check that out. But yeah, that's what I'm doing right now. I love connecting with other adults with ADHD. So many of us really like have similar stories, and there's so much strength in community. So if you're listening to this and want to just, have a quick chat, feel free to find me on Instagram and, ask me any of the questions. I'll answer what I can.
Congratulations for all the things. I am excited to see this new chapter, figuratively and literally. But also like, and I can speak to is like, I found you on Instagram as well. And I find your content very valuable and meaningful. And, similar to this audience, part of the reason I was like, we need to chat and do this is like, you do show up in a very authentic way. And also like show up with support. And I think that like anyone here who's been listening and vibes with this audience definitely will like appreciate and be seen and heard and understood over there. And I think that it's just like a really good space. So I hope that everyone checks that out. And I'm just so grateful that you were willing to have this conversation with me today. And to anyone listening, just remember that yes, we can play a part in our relationships, right? But also we can let go of that shame and instead look inward with compassion and acceptance and get the tools and supports. And that's what people like Meredith and I are here for. So, just know you're not alone. And even those of us who are teaching others got it all too. So don't judge yourself too much. And I hope you take care of yourself and that this was meaningful for you, and connect with Meredith, and we will see you next time.
Thanks so much, Taelor. It was so fun.
Of course. Bye, everyone.